All right, so just to start, I'm Stephanie Brown. I am the Assistant Director of Student Support Services and Wellness here in Morton. Previous to this, I was a principal, and previous to that, I've been a school counselor. I've also taught English. I have 3 children, 5th grade and 7th grade and sophomore year. And the reason that is relevant is because I am living all of the things that I'm reading and talking to you about. So I get it on all lenses, and so I think that's why that's really important. But really, I'm just excited to be here with all of you and kind of share this information and get some of your insights too. I wouldn't say that I am an expert. I am just someone who is interested in the topic, has read the book. I've sort of lived in my decade as being a school counselor at a high school level. I've sort of lived this, so maybe that does give me a little street cred and expertise. But this book was really foundational, and Don and I have been talking about it since we read it. So if you've listened to our podcast, it's just really inspired a lot of discussion. So we're excited to be here with you tonight and share some of the contents of the book.
Whew, I didn't know if I was going to get to...
It's all you.
I didn't know if I was going to get to do an introduction there or not, but I'm usually the one that they give me a hard time about talking a lot. So, my name is Don Sturm. My official title is Technology Integration Specialist for the district, and I have been in this role for 11 years. I was a high school social studies teacher at Morton High School for 23 years before that, and then 3 years as a social studies teacher in Danville. So if you add all those up, I think it's 34 years in education. And I am completely fixated on this, and it is on this topic. For me, there have been times where I think to myself, okay, I'm a tech integration specialist. I shouldn't be reading this stuff, because then it makes me look at what I do differently. But that's what I like about this. It has really made me think about what we do in the district and how we do it and how we help kids. I mean, it's just, and it seems like now everything, I'm going through this training with Stephanie, and there was a optional assignment to do. Well, I noticed the optional assignment was 3 research articles on cell phones. That was not optional for me. I mean, I've gone through, and so I'm just completely fixated on this topic. And I have 2 kids, 132 and 127, and I'm thankful that the time period that we start to see some dramatic changes was at the tail end of when my kids were in school. So I didn't really deal with it. I'm dealing with it with other people's kids, not with my own. So
yeah. So the intentions of tonight is I kind of already mentioned it. We're going to talk about the contents of the book, and then we will stop the recording and we will ask. We have some people that are going to help us facilitate a discussion at the tables. We'll put up the discussion questions, and then we'll gather feedback. Does that sound good? Does anybody have any questions before we start?
I think if you've listened to the podcast before, we are really big on the non-blaming, non-shaming, walking alongside people. So our goal is not in this presentation to say this is what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. That's not our role. Our role is just to say, here is some of the research that's out there. What we're going to talk about is research based on this book. So if it ever comes across like, oh, Morton is saying this is what they're going to do, that's not our intention. Our intention is to share this. The book study, we just met with the library today, and I think we're going to do kind of do a community book study on this. So there will be definitely more time to be able to talk through some of the particulars, the specifics.
Yeah. All right, John already mentioned it. This is the book. It's been a GIF discussion if it's Jonathon Haidt or Jonathon Haidt, but we did Google it, and Google knows that it's Haidt. So Jonathon Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. Have anybody in here read it? Okay, so we have a few yeses. We're going to give a very high-level overview. So 45-minute presentation, we could probably talk about one of the topics for 45 minutes. So just keep in mind, we're not going to go through the whole entire book. For example, the book talks a lot about the differences between boys and girls and how social media can impact them differently. We're not even going to address that tonight. But it's a very important part of the book. We just had to pick and choose. And we hope we don't go over. So that I would encourage you from this, if you're intrigued beyond this, and I'm assuming you're intrigued since you're here, I really would encourage you to read the book, either joining our community book study or reading it on your own, because there is a lot of really good content within the book. And this is what the whole thing will be based on tonight, is this anxious generation.
And this is the same gentleman. Have you read Coddling of the American Mind? He wrote that book 2 or 3 years ago, and he talks about how that was just like the starting point, and this is what it turned into.
Yeah.
So,
all right, so we're going to give some graphics, and this one Don's specifically going to talk about, but we pulled these graphics off of, there's a resource guide that comes with the book, and so it is public. So we pulled these off, there's sources on there, but we just kind of want to talk about a few of the graphics that stood out to us, this being one of them. When you think of the title being The Anxious Generation, where does he get that from? Welcome, you can come on in. So go ahead, Don.
yeah, and I don't know if you can read this, but it says the exact question wording was, how often did you feel nervous during the past 30 days? The numbers that are represented here are the percentage who chose the highest 2 options out of 5. That was all the time or most of the time. And it was only asked to those high school seniors who were 18 or older. And so you start seeing, if you look at that graph, it's 2008 to 2022. We can talk about how graphics can, and I think the next one is maybe even more so, how sometimes it can be misleading depending on how data is put on the x-axis and y-axis. That shaded in the book, there are a lot of his graphs that are shaded, and that is between 2010 and 2015. That's what his contention is. That's when cell phones started kind of taking over. That idea, and smartphones. He's talking about smartphones, not flip phones. So when you see that kind of gray area and you see this kind of dramatic increase, you start to see the increase in the blue line, the 18 to 25. Not that we don't, I mean, I care about people 50 and over. But you notice that for them, during that 2010 to 2015, there wasn't really much of a change. You notice the difference from 2010 to 2014 in the ages 16 to 25. It's worth noting this is self-reported, and that's a whole other can of worms that we can open up. But I mean, this is kind of what set him off. Like, why is this happening? Why are we seeing this kind of data present?
The only other thing I want to add to this is Jonathon Haidt.
I'm Team Haidt.
He refers to it as a play-based childhood, which a lot of us in here, actually all of us in here, I don't think most of us are below 25, we would be a play-based childhood, and then he starts referring to a phone-based childhood. And so when I said I got street cred because I'm a parent of these kids, my kids are in a phone-based childhood, right? Like they've grown up where the iPhone has existed. And so that's when Don is talking about that. That's the difference. He goes phone-based childhood, play-based childhood, just to kind of reiterate that.
Again, these are two that you have to be, I think it is a dramatic increase, but you have to be careful of, the 0, 200, 400, 600. And then on the other graph, you're seeing, by the way, emergency department visits for non-fatal self-harm. I will tell you, when you read the book, it can get depressing, particularly the first chapter, because it goes through not just non-fatal self-harm. We thought here we would try to keep it a little bit more upbeat. But this is where, as Stephanie mentioned, there is a difference between boys and girls. We just want to point out this idea of the dramatic increase for 10 to 14 is on the left, 15 to 19 is on the right. And again, you have the gray box representing that end of the play-based childhood. And you see this increase of emergency room visits much more dramatically for girls. But again, that was his thought. Why are those going up so much in that time period? That's kind of how his research was carried out. That was his kind of thought process.
So if you look at the first one and it's like, yeah, that was self-reported. Maybe there's just a fluke that the kids just said they were more anxious. Then this is like the tangible, I would say, parallel to that, where you can see they reported and there were emergency room visits. So when I looked at both of those, it's like that's important for them to be seen together. But he has a lot of graphics. That's why I would encourage you to look at them. We just pulled out these, and they are pretty profound in the increase, but just wanted to make sure to share that I think it's important to think about them together. So it's not just the self-report. It's also my counselor hat comes on, and I say, like, I've helped a lot of kids walk through self-harm, and what I hear them telling me is it is a response to anxiety, stress, right? It doesn't mean necessarily that that it always leads to something like suicide or necessarily that they have a mental health diagnosis, but it's that there's a response to the stressor, which could then be correlated to anxiety. So I just wanted to make sure to mention it.
And I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, and this is kind of like my former geography where we dealt with a lot of statistics between countries, you might look at that and go, I don't even know, like that means 600, let's just take that top one there, 600 per 100,000 people. So if you then break that down and say, well, that is 6 per 1,000, are there other statistics? Like you might look at that and go, is that even a lot? I mean, 6 per 1,000. I started looking at what are some other statistics that we have that might mean more to us. And so, like, for instance, car accidents. The car accident rate over the whole country, all age levels, is something like 12 per 1,000. Suicide rate overall is something like 14.61 per 1,000. And so when you start looking at that, you're like, oh, okay, that is a significant, they would look at this as a significant health crisis if it were other medical conditions.
Yeah. Any questions on that? Okay. So the book is broken down into different parts. And what we have found has pretty beneficial is to talk about the 4 foundational harms and then talk about his recommendations of basically the so what, now what. So we're going to go over at a high level again of the 4 different harms that Jonathon Haidt mentions. We will share a graphic or a quote from the book. And just to kind of get you thinking before our discussion, we're just going to share some of the things that stood out to us. But by all means, like I said, there's plenty more. So the first one would be social deprivation. And I'm going to share this graphic right away. So for me, when I think of what that means and what's the importance, this graphic really does it for me. So the daily time with friends by age group. So if you can look at 2003, there was 160 minutes per day for age 15 to 24. And then by 2019, it goes down to 40. And so this was reported on the data collection on the American Time Use Study. So I liked it when I've had multiple conversations with caregivers. It's been like, is all social media bad? And in the moment, if I'm asked for my opinion, it can't be in replace of face-to-face time. So if I have good connections with my neighbors and my kids are playing and they're doing these things and they're on something for a time limit or have a boundary, then to me, it's not a complete replacement. But he's trying to show us that unfortunately, there's been a lot of replacement where they're not hanging out with same age or peers. They're spending most of their time on their device. So social deprivation is a big part of the book that he talks about. You can see the other thing he talks about is the age. And so this play-based versus phone-based childhood and the time with friends didn't impact ages 25 through 64 as much. You can see the dramatic difference isn't as intense there. he brings that up because we grew up in a play-based childhood. That's what he would say, so that this isn't our only source. And it's not everybody's only source, but some of our adolescents are going to that versus going and playing with their friends. We happen to have, just a personal story, we happen to have a neighbor that's close by that has 6 kids, and we have 3. They're together all the time, and they're outside. They play disc golf, they play basketball, they play football, they just run around and play. And the number of times that people stop and tell me or the other neighbor, like, wow, we just love seeing your kids outside. This is so crazy. And it actually makes me really sad because my kids love it. And so will they sit there and watch a TV for a long time until I say in the summer, like, guys, it's nice, go outside? Absolutely they would. But they also really love the play. So I don't think it's that the kids don't want to play. I really think that that's a huge part of it. It's just that we have to make sure as adults that the systems are set up for them to be successful. And so sometimes it's the mom nudge, get outside, right? But that always surprises me. We get that a lot. Like, it's so great to see your kids outside. And I'm like, thanks, but it's also really sad. So.
Sleep deprivation is another one of the 4 foundational harms. And again, if you look at the graphic that's here, teens who get less than 7 hours of sleep a night. Again, I always look at that shade. That shaded part has become a fixation for me because that is what caused him to look at this. I mean, you can look at it and say, oh, well, starting in 1997, it went up, but you see the fairly dramatic increase between 2010 and 2015. And you think about, I know Stephanie and I talk about this a lot, sleep, it's probably the most, I don't know if I say underrated. Like, I think about when I was growing, now, if somebody said you could go home and go to bed at 7, I would be like, yes, that would be awesome. Or taking a nap on the weekend or something like that. When I was a kid, I didn't think I needed sleep. I mean, I was one that could go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and get up at 6 and go to school. I realize now that's like, I was just fooling myself. And so this idea of, and you think about the phones, thinking about your situation, and it could be literally your situation. I sleep with my phone charging right next to my bed. Now I have it go on sleep at 10 o'clock. By that point, I've probably been asleep for a half an hour.
You're in REM
but
sleep.
It goes to sleep at 10 o'clock, and then it doesn't give me notifications except for certain family members. Stephanie and Courtney, they have, if they call at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to answer it. But I think about how important sleep is for me, and actually, I'm in that other time. I'm in the time now where I don't need as much sleep physiologically as a young person does. And so this idea of having that phone constantly there and notifications, we went to a class at the high school and interviewed, and they had this, I wish we would have put a picture of it on there now that I think about it. They had they had a piece of paper with tally marks over how many notifications. The teacher would say, I want you to take your cell phone out and put it on your desk, and I want you to allow notifications. And the notification would pop up, and the kid would get up. They were doing a unit on this. They don't do this all the time. And then I was making sure that I was clear there.
Yeah, that's
and they
good.
would mark it down, and it was Snapchat, I think. When you looked at it, it was crazy numbers. 50 to 60 of these tally marks during the day. Now, during the day, that's a whole other argument.
Just during that class period.
During that class period,
Yeah,
yes.
not during the day.
Imagine if that was happening at night, because if they're not sleeping as long, there are other kids that aren't sleeping as long, and that idea of just these notifications that are then impacting the sleep that they get.
So 2 really funny stories. I'm sorry, I just have to do it. So one time I called Don, not at 2 in the morning, but I was like, Don, I don't understand. I'm not getting notifications and I'm missing stuff. And he's like, well, did you turn on Do Not Disturb for some reason? I'm like, well, yeah. He said, well, that's why you're not getting notifications. I'm like, I can't keep up with this stuff. I thought I was doing it so I didn't get interrupted at night, but you also had to do that just at a time frame, apparently. So that was thing 1. Thing 2 was one time I got really mad at my son, the 15-year-old, because we left for a concert, and when we got home, his only job was to watch the dog. And when we got home, our dog made a mess, and my son was sleeping on the couch. And I was complaining to Don about this, and he said, Stephanie, I can't even believe you're mad at Liam because you always talk about how sleep is so important. And obviously he was tired, and I was like, no, we're not gonna do that right now. So I feel like it is a priority, but it's also really hard, and I don't know if this resonates with anyone, but one of my challenges as a parent is depending on what other people are doing in that friend group, right? So I know that they talk a lot as peers, and so I make mine put their phone on the kitchen table, and then he'll be like, but I didn't see the message from, and I'm like, well, this is what it is. But this is a hard one because I don't think, just like Don said, I don't think that my adolescent prioritizes sleep unless he's supposed to be watching the dog. So remember that?
But I did call you. Oh, I remember
did.
that.
You
I was
called me
hoping
out
you
on
were
it.
going to tell that story.
Yeah.
Go back a point, the social interaction.
Oh. Yeah.
Social interaction. So what he's saying is, even though the teams are there constantly having chat rooms open back and forth to each other, that's not enough, right? They almost need the nonverbal face to really make it a quality social interaction. Is that kind of what he's saying?
Yeah. That it doesn't replace, that we are social creatures, social beings. We need to be in space with one another, not just on our devices. And so,
Well, and
yeah, that's what he's saying when he says social deprivation.
And I would go even one step further and say it's not just the nonverbal, it's the voice inflection. And I think about, have you ever gotten a text before and you're like, oh, I don't know what they mean by that.
Yeah.
Like, they could mean that they're being accusatory toward me, but that surely can't be. And so then you ask them, and then you're like that emoji that's like, like that, and where I had that place, so I can recognize that. But if a kid who's not had that same level of face-to-face, they just haven't learned that. Yeah.
It's like I think it's in this book we're the most disconnected, non-disconnected, or non-connected, I mean, right? Like, we feel like, oh, we have all these followers and all these people, but the real relationships with people, the real ability to talk to Chris and disagree with him and be in the same space, and that is, I think, the social deprivation. Yeah, thanks for asking.
Where they have them watch the educational video, so they have to be part of the group, and then they have the exact same version of this video presented in person, so that they can use that kind of information, exact same information, and they have two groups on that. And then the groups that have the first in-person presentation actually show 4 times better information and development suggestions on that, and then the watch the video. And so there's something about that UV space that we need to information and not just better information, but it's like
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing. Anything else? All right. Attention fragmentation. So this, we pulled a quote out from this because there wasn't any graphics specific to this in the resource. So I'm just going to read it out loud, even though I know we can read. But every app is an off-ramp. Every notification is a Las Vegas-style sign calling out to you to turn the wheel, tap here, and I'll tell you what someone just said about you. And no matter how hard it is for an adult to stay committed to one mental road, it is harder for an adolescent who has an immature frontal cortex and therefore a limited ability to say no to off-ramps. This kind of goes to the constant notifications that Don was talking about in that classroom. I've, of course, talked to my child about this since I'm reading this, and he said to me, and this is almost verbatim, there's so much coming at me all the time, right? From what we expect, what the school expects, the classes, but then also this component that's the notifications and the drive and the desire to belong, right? So as soon as that ding goes off, it's the dopamine hit of like, somebody needs me and I better check it, right? And their brains just, this is what they're growing on. And so I really think that's a interesting quote. I don't know if anybody has any comments on it or if it resonates with anyone, but we just thought it's a good reminder of it's difficult for us and it's difficult for me. So what is it like for my 15, and I'm using my 15-year-old. I mean, this goes down to whatever age you insert, so.
I mean,
go
like,
ahead.
oh,
Mhm. Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah.
it'd be interesting to talk to Marshall Tucker and
Yeah.
Henderson and see. I'm sure, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I can't imagine there is not research out there about that. And I was going to say, I think to me, the way to think about this as an adult is to think about, and I'm not asking you to share this, but how good are you at this? I will admit there are some things I'm getting better at, but I am a Twitter person and have built a group of people, other educators that are on there. And if I post something, like I write a blog post or I do something, I'd be lying to you if I said I don't post it and then be like, oh, somebody read it. Oh, somebody commented on it. And then it really does make me step back and say, if my 50-some-year-old brain can't handle that and I'm struggling with it, this idea of the brain, and I mean, she has gotten me fixated on the brain. I asked that question, can we truly teach something that they're not capable of learning? And that to me is...
Meaning, can we teach them to ignore the notification? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Anything that requires something, a fully developed brain, can we teach them that? Like, are there certain sets of skills? Like, I cannot teach my 2-year-old, I don't have a 2-year-old, but I cannot teach my 2-year-old how to do something that their brain is not. Now, of course, I used that example and then couldn't pull an example out of my head. I'm not going to be able to teach them physics the way that I would a junior. I could roll a ball and make them start thinking, but I can't say, okay, now, the fulcrum here, and well, you know, they don't have the capacity to learn that.
Fulcrum.
I know.
That's pretty good. Danielle, did you say something?
Yeah, I think another way to look at it too is just the idea that it's not just their brain, but it's their brain against the team of engineers.
Oh, yeah.
Is the grade up and keep them on it.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean, it's not just teaching skills, but just that reality that we would sometimes do a tug of war in class, like one kid versus people who are being paid, a whole group of other people. It's not a good app if you want to get off of it, right?
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks for sharing.
That actually relates to what we're going to talk about. We put 2 visuals up here. This idea of addiction. How many of you have heard that term used in relationship to cell phones or video games or whatever? There's discussion about is it truly addiction? But this idea of, like, I think growing up, I don't know, is that still there?
I think so.
You can't just eat one, you know. And then the slot machines. I mean, that is what companies, they know what they're doing.
We have to tell about the class. When we were in the class with our students, they made us aware that TikTok has a notification that will come up after 6 hours.
I think because I've never seen it.
I think I don't quote me because I don't
think
even
it was
have TikTok,
6
but I
hours.
think it was 6 hours. And they were talking about how this notification will come up that's like, you should probably do something else. And I was like, I am old. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
6
hours.
But that is the rabbit trail of getting on to these. And I mean, I like a good Instagram reel. So I don't know. I'm assuming TikTok is similar, right? But to get lost on that. So then we asked, like, well, what do you do? But it's just a notification that tells you, and then you say, I'm good, right? But that really was like, wow, like it's hard to get off. That doesn't mean that student is addicted to TikTok. I'm just telling you. Those engineers are creating a notification, so they're maybe doing their justice, but 6 hours.
And they were even talking about how they will, I thought it was funny, they will sometimes go in and use they will do the screen restrictions, screen time on the iPad or their iPhone. Like they'll set it, and this one kid was like, "Oh yeah, I set it, but I know the password." Well, it was funny because he said, "But when I do that, it only lets me do that so many times, and then it shuts it down." And in my head, I was like, "That's what we need people to start doing, is like on their own setting that." Right now, I need news apps. I used to teach social studies, so this is like the time of the year with election and all of that. I need to just limit my news.
You probably at the 6-hour mark, Don.
Oh, I don't even want to look at, I don't even want to look at that. If you go to the next one, and this is what Stephanie kind of alluded to be clear, on page 130, to be clear, the great majority of adolescents using Instagram or playing Fortnite are not addicted, but their desires are being hacked and their actions manipulated nonetheless. And this goes to what we've already kind of talked about, that idea of hacked and manipulated. And this is not to be conspiracy. I mean, it is factual that companies, they employ psychologists to say, this is what we need to do to keep them in the app. Because the longer we keep them in the app, the more ads and things like that we can show them. That is what's going to get them there. And then we run into this idea of proprietary knowledge, like or proprietary information. If I'm a company that has developed this algorithm that will suck you in, I don't have to share that with anybody, because it's proprietary information. And so you're starting to see this discussion about, well, food companies, I mean, when I taught history, we would always talk about the early 1900s, you could put anything and everything in food. And at some point, the federal government said, wait a second, you have to report what is in the food. And we will test it to see what's in the food. And so you're starting to see this push to make social media companies more responsive. I thought it was interesting. Instagram now has put a limit for 14, I think is what it is. And Instagram was hailed at, oh my gosh, this is a start. But anybody know how that works? How do I get on the app if I am 12 years old and start an account? Yep, so I'm 14. There is no age check that we have. And so I think you're going to see that down the road. But
Questions about the 4 foundational harms? So it's sleep deprivation, social deprivation, addiction, and attention fragmentation. Okay. So I like to say the so what, now what. So these are the reforms. These are what,
according to
Jonathon Haidt is suggesting. So here they are. This is what we will get feedback on, but there are no smartphones before high school, no social media before 16, phone-free schools, and far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. And so each of these gets their own section in the book, but this is what he says is the so what, now what. The other part that he talks about that we didn't put on this presentation is he really talks about kind of what I alluded to earlier. If caregivers can sort of rally together, there's strength in numbers. So they're having a blast out there. Maybe we should call them in and ask them their opinions on these things. They're not on their phones. See, that's fun. They're out there just playing around.
Dr. Sater is going to go out and ruin their fun.
Then they're going to get on their phones. I'm just kidding. Is that there's strength in numbers. And so the idea that he throws out there is like, if my child has 6 close friends, then if us as caregivers get on the same page with any of these, then there's not like and all of us have heard this if you're a parent, I'm the only one that doesn't, you fill in the blank. And so he really says that there's power in that. And so we didn't put that on here, but I did want to mention for those of you that are not going to maybe read the book and just take this. I thought that was really important, especially as I have my 10-year-old and we're starting to have conversations, and my 12-year-old about what this will look like. It was something that my husband and I were like, yeah, that's a good conversation to have. So,
And he does distinguish between smartphones, and he's not saying that there shouldn't be, that your child shouldn't be able to have a flip phone or what I referred to like a dumb phone.
Gizmo.
But that idea of a smartphone connected to the internet all the time, he says that shouldn't be before high school. No social media before 16. He talks a lot in the book about the laws that were passed at the federal level, and because there's compromise, it turned out being 13, and his contention is that's too young. There are some people that I think he would ultimately say, I wish it was more than 16, but he also brings in the idea at some point you have to give them long enough to be able to do it before they're just off on their own. And so I think that's where he kind of comes around to that 16.
The phone-free zones is what he suggests, and this looks different, obviously in different systems, but that is a suggestion of his, that you can't compete, the learning environment can't compete against the things that we just talked to you about, the attention fragmentation, the social deprivation, those types of things. And then the far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. In the Coddling of the American Mind, he talks a lot about like the 80s and when we started doing, I don't remember the exact terminology he uses, but it's starting where we have seatbelts. I mean, I literally was on in the back of a pickup truck going 50 miles an hour down the highway with no seatbelts.
Sitting on a bucket.
And he starts talking about how we started, it's safetyism. That's what he refers to it as. And it's like this whole thing of stranger danger and the seatbelts and all these things, which aren't bad in and of themselves, right? Like everybody wants their child to be safe, but it also comes with not seeing the neighborhood kids all together and being gone until dinner when they just have to come home because it's dark out, right? Like, so he talks a lot about the far more unsupervised play, which is another thing that if it's strength in numbers. If multiple caregivers say this and it's okay for my kids to walk over to your house and reciprocal, then we know, and you can still text, the parents can text and those types of things. So he gives some pretty good so what, now what, not just like, here's all the problems. These are what he suggests.
Dr. Teeter and I talked with a local psychiatrist, I think he's a psychiatrist. And it was funny, he pointed out, and I hadn't really thought about it, he said he didn't like the word unsupervised, that he liked the word unstructured. And I think, like, Jonathon Haidt would say, you don't take a 4-year-old and just, okay, I'm going to the mall and let them play on their own. That's not what, so unsupervised, making sure we understand that. And this, I'm going to tell a story. I always get so excited now after reading Coddling of the American Mind, and this one, I called Stephanie and I was like, you should have saw what I saw today. There were these two girls at Main and Jefferson, and they walked, you know how there's the little things to press which side of the road, like this one points that way, so I have to press it to get the walk to go that way, and this one, these two girls, 10? I mean, I think I'm looking at you.
You
like,
said 10.
Okay,
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Well, then I was worried I'm going to say like 9 or 8, and you're going to go, no, you said 10. But they were like 10-ish. And they both walked up, and I mean, I'm sitting 2 or 3 cars back at the light, and I was like, I'm watching them. And then they walked up, and they're like, and they're looking at the light, and you could just tell the wheels were turning like, I don't really know what to do here. Are we going that way? And I saw one of them go, oh, that point. And then they pressed the button, and then they stood there, and then they walked across the road. And in my head, I was like, that, like, I think those are the kind of things that some people would be like, oh my gosh, I can't let my kids do that. And then there's that snowball effect that if nobody in your neighborhood lets their 10-year-old do that, and you do it, then it's like the spotlight's on you, like, oh, you're a bad parent because you're letting, and so I think so many of these things, oh, I saw those 2 kids
He's so excited
crossing
about
the road by Jefferson, like little girl grabbed her brother's hand who was probably 3, she was 7 or 8, and I'm probably not a good judge of age. She might have been 15, but the kid was little, and I mean, they got to the street, and they kind of looked both ways. She grabbed his hand and went across. And again, I was like, I mean, it made my dad heart be like, oh, that's kind of cool. I mean, and there were nobody that I could see around.
So when those opportunities happen, so the unsupervised, unstructured, whatever you want to call it, it builds confidence. And then confidence is the opposite of the anxiety, right? So you can see where all of this comes together, whether it's crossing the road or it's whatever, unstructured play. Right now in our society, we structure everything. You can't just play soccer. You have to be, I mean, my 3-year-old signing up for soccer, and then we're telling them exactly where to stand and exactly what to do and yada. So there is, it's a societal thing. And I know some of you in here read the book Never Enough with us. I mean, it's kind of in the same vein, but when Don's examples are perfect to show, like that builds confidence, that confidence fights against the anxiety, so to speak. So does that make sense?
There's a whole organization called Let Grow that you can go to that has, it's pretty cool. I mean, it even gives them like a little license that says, I know that my kid is in the grocery store by themselves purchasing something. I am sitting outside. And that it's kind of that permission to do that.
I did make Vivian do it. 9 years old. I was like, go in and get, I should have picked something easier, but I was like, go in and get a loaf of bread like that we're gonna like cut, Viv, not that's pre-cut, like go to the bakery, get a loaf of bread. I sat in the car. She comes back on. She says, Mom, the lady told me to come ask you. I have no idea what I'm doing. I was like, Viv, go to the bakery. It's like Italian bread. It's a loaf. So she went back in. She kind of got what I wanted, but I just was like, yep, that's good, and moving along. So I'm going to give her a list next time.
Well,
Garlic powder, something chilies or something crazy, right? I'll just do that. But
well, and in the Sturm household, you became an adult at 10. That's when our kids started doing their own laundry. And I can remember our neighbors being like, how does that work? Like, what if they go to school in dirty clothes? And I can remember saying, and I wasn't kidding, then somebody will tell them. And they will feel bad about that. And then they'll not go to school with dirty clothes. And I mean, we've talked about like any of your kids wear shorts when it's like 47 degrees below zero?
yeah,
I mean, there's a point where it's like, well, they'll get frostbite, their leg will turn black, and no, we're
you
about
have
ready.
something you need to say.
I do, but have you ever said something and you know you made a mistake and you're trying to figure out how to inject the correction in there?
No.
When I made the comment about the suicide rate was 14 per 1,000, that is not accurate. It is 14 per 100,000, which is 1.4 per 1,000. That to me, because some of you might have been like, well, wait a second, the suicide rate is higher than the anxiety. That's what, I mean, literally, we were like 2 minutes, I was like, I think I said that wrong. So, yeah.
That's good correction. Good
Yeah,
job.
so I'm,
Now you better read the last index card.
yes. So we are going to stop the record. Don't stop yet. We're going to stop the recording. If you're watching this at home, we will have a Google form at the bottom of the, I feel like I need to talk into the camera. We'll have a link at the bottom of the YouTube page for you to click that will ask you to give some feedback like they're going to do here. Okay? But when you talk, you're not going to be recorded in your small groups on video.